Advisory Board regular monthly board meeting is being held in the Authorizer Board office building via teleconference in accordance with the state law, Code Section 25-41-5. Notice of the meeting was posted prior to the meeting in accordance with state law. The audio recording of the meeting will be made available and minutes of the meeting will be recorded. Now let's move to the announcement of the quorum, and as I call your name, please state present and give your location. Mrs. Jean Cook.
Present, Clinton, Mississippi.
Mr. Leland Speed.
Here, Jackson, Mississippi.
Ms. Jennifer Whittier.
Present, Brookhaven, Mississippi.
Mrs. Carolyn Willis.
Here, Houston, Texas.
Thank you. We have a quorum and the regular monthly board meeting is called to order. Anyone else who is attending the meeting who we would like to have your name recorded in the minutes, please go ahead and state your name and your location. Denise, are you there?
I am. Denise DeRossett in Clinton.
Avery, are you on?
Yes, I am. This is Avery Lee. I'm in Oxford, Mississippi.
Okay, are there others that are normally listed in the minutes of the meeting?
I'm just calling to make sure that you never filed an unemployment claim with the Mississippi Department of Employment Security.
I think somebody is talking about something that doesn't have anything to do with this board meeting. You may want to mute your audio, whoever that is. Jordan, do we need everyone to go ahead and state their name, or do you know of everybody else that's in the meeting?
We just need the board members, Ms. DeRossett and Ms. Lee, so we're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on to the agenda. The first item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda itself. The agenda was sent out ahead of time. I hope everyone's had a chance to look at it. Is there any discussion? If not, I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The agenda is hereby adopted. The next item is to approve the minutes of the September 14th meeting. Along with the agenda, the minutes were sent out ahead of time and everyone should have had a chance to take a look at them by now. Is there any discussion or does anyone have any proposed changes to the meeting minutes? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes as written.
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
None opposed. We will approve the minutes for the September 14th meeting. Moving on, we are at the chair report. The chair doesn't have anything to report today, so let's move on to Dr. Carmen Chira and the executive director report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see everybody. I can see most of your beautiful faces, although I see some phone numbers and just some names as well. So welcome to all the board members and our visitors and guests. I don't have a huge report this month, which I guess is good, and we just have a lot going on, but nothing major to report other than the NACSA conference is this month. It's actually going to be virtual, which allows for Jordan and Vanda and I all three to attend, which is great. There's no travel cost this year, and we can all deliver out each one of those components, which is important to our work, and make sure that we're all getting what we need from NACSA. And for those of you new board members who don't know or aren't familiar with NACSA, that's the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, and they do great work, and we are glad to be going to this conference even though it's virtual. Also, I see one of our guests here, Julie. I'm assuming that's Julie Winklejohn. If she is, maybe she'll send us a little happy face or something. But she and her team over at Peer have been working diligently with the authorizer on our annual Peer report. And so Julie and her folks will have that draft version ready for us on the 22nd of the month. And then Mr. Billingsley and I will have a time to go over and visit with her team toward the end of the month and go through that report before it's released to the public. Student enrollment task force, that work is winding down, and the legislative task force that work is just beginning. So we'll kick off that legislative task force work at the end of this month. Our school support check-ins are ongoing, and those have been going really well, where schools can have a moment to just share what's going on at their schools, challenges that they're facing during this incredibly challenging time. And then we can share updates from our perspective and whatever we happen to have in terms of support that we can provide at that time. The only other thing I have is just to simply bring to the board's attention, and I think some of you know this and some of you may not, depending on where you popped in onto the board and began your service. But Revive Prep and Republic High School, a part of Republic School Inc.'s CMO, they were approved for charters for 2 schools back in 2017. They delayed that, the openings of those 2 schools, and they came in December of last year and provided an update to the board on the progress to date, where they are. They will have to do that again this year, and they'll have to actually submit something in writing to us, because their plan is to go ahead with Revive Prep and then open in the school year of 2022-23. So state law allows the board to delay a school opening for 1 year, and then Republic will actually have to come back and ask for the extension, and it'll be based on their extenuating circumstances around COVID and other things. And you know, if you were here last year, you heard about the location of the school was an issue for them in South Jackson, and they wanted to move perhaps to the North Jackson area. So we'll continue working with them on that request, and you guys will have something in the next few months, something formal to look at from them with respect to their requested extension. So any questions?
No.
Anybody else have a question or comment? Okay, all right, then we'll move on.
Thank you. Let's move on to the financial report. Mrs. DeRosette, do you have the financial report ready?
And I'm like Dr. Comacheri, there's not as much to report this time since y'all met last month. Most of the majority of the expenses in this last month have been for salaries, routine items, supplies, and some online things like the Zoom. Most of your contractual expenses were not supposed to occur during the first quarter, so we haven't seen much of that, but we expect that to pick up in the next quarter. The grant expenses were a little over $137,000, and again, the majority of that expense is going to the schools. 84% of it was in the sub-grants to those 3 schools that had the grants. And then the only other thing I have to report is we've received no additional revenue since the last board meeting, but that is not an issue because we have enough cash reserves. That's really all I have to report, unless y'all have any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, let's move on. Dr. K, would you like to talk about the Technical Assistance Mississippi First?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. Each year, the school partners or has partnered with Mississippi First in the past. I guess it's our 3rd report, Torin, actually. Your second official?
Second report.
Yeah, I was thinking there was some partnership even before I got here with respect to the survey, but maybe that was just initial setup and work that was ongoing. So Mississippi First has been a great partner of ours for a long time for the authorizer board. Worked really closely with the statute, even getting that passed as far back as 2015. So they are a good friend of ours, a good friend of charter schools, and we were delighted to be able to partner with them again this year on the annual survey. And Mr. Torin Ballard is going to present the results of that survey from charter school parents and charter school parents. And he's going to give you the details on that report, and we're really excited about what the report has to say. So Torrin, you're up.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Are you able to see the PowerPoint here?
We are.
Yeah.
You are? Okay, great. All right, so I'm just going to jump right into it then. Well, first off, I just want to thank Dr. Karmacharya and the board for having me here today to discuss the results from this survey. A lot of very positive findings, as we will soon see. So just a brief introduction. My name is Torrin Ballard. I'm the K-12 Policy Director at Mississippi First. And for those of you who are not quite as familiar with our work, we are a 501c3 public policy nonprofit. We're based right here in Jackson. And we do have substantial experience working with Mississippi's growing charter school sector. And most recently, that has been conducting the charter school survey. This is our second year doing it, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So a quick bit of background about the survey itself. About 3 years ago, the board received a federal charter schools program grant. And as part of that grant, the board proposed to sponsor an annual parent and general public survey to assess awareness, general sentiment, satisfaction levels, and concerns about charter schools. So for both iterations of the survey, Mississippi First was commissioned to design, conduct, analyze, and report the survey. Both years, we have partnered with the Survey Research Lab at Mississippi State to finalize the research questions and administer the survey, which was done over the phone. This year, it was done in July of this past summer, so relatively recently. So just briefly about the survey itself. So the survey, there's about 30 survey items, so different questions, and they assess general knowledge about charter schools, public opinion on charter schools, and parent satisfaction with charter schools as well. There are also 11 demographic items, and these were to ensure that the respondents were representative of the overall population of parents, and also to do some further analysis based on these demographic factors. And importantly, this year's survey is essentially the same survey as the one that we did in the 2018-2019 school year. And so that really allows us to see how some of the results and public opinion change over time, which I think is a very important part of this analysis. And throughout the presentation, I will be referencing last year's findings as well. All right, so briefly just how this worked. Participants for our survey were randomly chosen from one of two parent pools, non-charter parent pool and a charter parent pool. So the non-charter parents are just parents of children who were enrolled in a Mississippi charter school in the 2019-2020 school year. Non-charter parents were parents of children who were eligible for going to a charter school, but were not actually enrolled. And so overall, we had about 214 respondents who were charter parents and 404 respondents who were non-charter parents. And importantly, this year, we're able to report our results also as an all-parent sample as well. And so that is a sample that is essentially representative of the overall population of parents, whether or not you sent your kid to a charter school or not. Because non-charter parents make up such a large percentage of parents in charter communities overall, you will notice, however, that the all parents results are going to be very similar to the non-charter parent results. But we'll see some of those later. Briefly, before I get into the questions in the survey, just want to briefly go over demographics of the two parent groups here. The two parent groups are very, very similar overall. Overall, they tended to be Black women under the age of 45. Most respondents had under $50,000 in household income, had not achieved a 4-year degree, and had attended a Mississippi public school at one point in time. The only differences between the two groups was that non-charter parents were slightly more likely to be in the very lowest category of income. Those were parents with a household income of less than $15,000 a year. And charter parents, on the other hand, were slightly more likely to have attended a Mississippi public school. But overall, the two groups were very similar. Really, the only difference is that one sends their kids to charter school and other to non-charter schools. In some cases, there's a little bit of overlap, though. So we'll just jump in right into the results from this year's survey. So the first questions that we asked here were meant to assess parents' knowledge, support, and opinion of charter schools. And importantly, we asked these questions of both charter parents and non-charter parents. Later on, I will mention some questions that we only asked of charter parents. So to start off, we wanted to gauge respondents' familiarity with charter schools and the concept of them in the first place. And so we just asked, how would you rate your familiarity with charter schools on a scale of 1 to 5? With 1 being not at all familiar, 5 being very familiar. So among both parent groups, there was higher familiarity this year than in 2019. And there was also higher familiarity among charter parents than non-charter parents. But overall, we should mention that 3 in 4 parents, about 72%, reported at least some familiarity. So at least a 2 on the scale of 1 to 5. So let's look at a bar graph of kind of the breakdown of responses here. So the first thing you might notice is that charter parents appear very familiar with charter schools. So we had about 99% of charter parents gave at least a 2 on the scale of 1 to 5. And that's compared to about 73% of non-charter parents. And as I also mentioned, there's much more familiarity than in 2019. And this is among both groups, non-charter and charter parents. So for instance, non-charter parents were about 4 percentage points more likely to give a 5 this year than last year. And charter parents were actually 14 percentage points more likely to give a 5 this year compared to last year. Now, these results are not exactly surprising. We can, on one hand, we can expect parents to become more familiar with charter schools over time just by being in a charter school community. And also, we would generally expect charter parents to be more familiar with charter schools than non-charter parents. And the results bear that out here. Now, one result of the survey that was a little more surprising is we asked a question about, would you say that charter schools are public or private schools? Now, those of you who were here for the presentation or who read last year's report would know that last year it was around 50-50 for both charter and non-charter parents in their answer to this question. And this year, the results are very similar. So identifying charter schools incorrectly as private schools, it remains an issue. We had just over half of all parents were not able to correctly identify charter schools as public schools. They said they were private instead. And very interestingly, these incorrect responses were prevalent among both non-charter parents and charter parents, which was, personally, I think relatively surprising. So these pie charts are kind of the breakdown of the responses for non-charter and charter parents. Now, you will notice here that there's slightly more correct responses among charter parents here on the right, but it wasn't a statistically significant difference between the two groups. So we can't say that charter parents were any more likely to have given a correct response to this question. Now, this is a little bit troubling because these results are very similar to 2019, and there really hasn't been any improvement on this. And so, for instance, we can't say that parents in charter communities in general are any more likely to identify charter schools correctly as public schools. So to me, these results indicate that educating the public about charter schools, particularly their status as free public schools, should remain a very high priority of the entire charter school sector. Now, I did do a little bit of further analysis on this question to see if responses to this question could be explained by someone's familiarity with charter schools or their support for charter schools. And no matter how familiar or unfamiliar respondents were, or no matter whether they were supportive or not supportive, responses were still pretty much the same. So you couldn't really explain it by support or familiarity. But one very interesting finding that I did find was that correct answers were somewhat associated with geography. So when we isolated respondents of just parents from Clarksdale, specifically Clarksdale parents with at least one child in a traditional public school, about 78% of Clarksdale parents correctly identified charter schools as public schools. And this is compared to about 49% of parents with children in other traditional public school districts, mainly Jackson Public Schools. So we just see much more correct responses in Clarksdale, which we found very interesting. So I think kind of moving forward, it seems to be that maybe the folks up in Clarksdale might be able to kind of give us some insight on ways that they were able to educate the public about, the definition of charter schools. There could be some important lessons to be learned there. But like I said, overall, the incorrect identification of charter schools still does remain somewhat of an issue. So the next questions that we asked had to do specifically with public opinion. And here we asked respondents to rate their level of support for having charter schools in Mississippi and having charter schools specifically in their community. Now, similar to last year, we see very strong support among all parents. Now, charter parents were somewhat more likely to voice support than non-charter parents, as we'll see in a moment. And there is actually slightly less support among non-charter parents than in 2019. But as we can see in this graph overall, support still remains very high. So among charter parents, you had about 96% of charter parents either somewhat or completely support charter schools in their community. This is compared to about 73% of non-charter parents. We also see on the left over here that the percentage of charter parents who completely support having charter schools in their community is twice as high as the percentage of non-charter parents who also agree with that. And on the other side of the spectrum, when we look at opposition to charter schools, we see that about 1 in 8 non-charter parents are opposed to charter schools, either somewhat or completely. And this is compared to essentially no charter parents at all. So we do see somewhat more opposition there. Now, the graph that I'm showing you here is for support for charter schools, specifically in their community as opposed to statewide. And responses when we asked about statewide support, it was higher, it was actually very similar among charter parents. They had the same level of support for charter schools statewide and in their community. But among non-charter parents, they were actually more likely to support charter schools in their community than statewide. So it was about 73% support in their community, 66% support statewide. So it's overall, it's relatively high, but it's higher when we ask specifically about charter schools in their community. And overall, this is pretty similar to 2019, except this year, non-charter parents were actually a little bit less likely to say that they completely support charter schools in their community. So this year we had 44.2% of non-charter parents say that they completely support charters. And last year, that was actually almost 53%. And so we did see those numbers go down a little bit, which is a little bit troubling. But we should note overall that we looked at a similar poll that asked this question essentially on a national scale. And there's much higher support in Mississippi for charter schools than there is nationally. In the national poll of parents, there was only about 50% either somewhat or completely support. And you had about 31% actually opposed to charter schools. And so in Mississippi, or at least in charter communities in Mississippi, there is both much higher support than nationally And there's also, very importantly, less opposition as well. So parents in Mississippi charter communities seem much more receptive to them than nationwide. Our next public opinion question asked specifically, how do you think having a charter school in your area has affected education in your community? About 6 in 10 of parents overall thought this impact was positive. It was higher among charter parents than non-charter parents, and the divide between charter parents and non-charter parents on this question does seem to be growing somewhat, and I'll talk about that more in just a moment here. So overall, we had about 93% of charter parents thought that the effect of opening a charter school has been either somewhat or very positive on education overall. And that's compared to about 60% of non-charter parents. So still a majority, but not as big of a majority as among charter parents. And when we look at results last year compared to this year, the divide on public opinion here does appear to be growing somewhat. So charter parents were last year only 63% thought the effect was very positive. This year it's 75%. And so that number went up a lot among charter parents. But non-charter parents were actually more likely to say that the effect has been somewhat negative this year compared to last year. So we looked down here at somewhat negative, it's 8.7%. That's still pretty low comparatively. But last year, that number was 3.6%. So it actually grew by more than half, which is, even though it's still pretty small overall, something that we should pay attention to kind of going forward. Now, it is a little bit difficult to infer exactly why these two groups of parents are going in opposite directions on this question. We would have to think about additional questions like, how do parents think about the state of education? Like, how do they assess the state of education? We also have to ask, how do parents believe charter schools are having the impact that they talk about here? When we hear people say that the impact has been positive, that positivity could be coming from growing satisfaction with charter schools, but positivity could also come from a belief that charter schools are influencing positive changes among traditional public schools as well. So it's hard to infer how people think that charter schools are affecting education, but we do see that a majority overall think that the effect is either somewhat or very positive, which I think is a very good finding for the charter school sector as a whole here in Mississippi. And next we asked point blank, just do children have access to high quality schools in your community? And overall, 3 in 4 said that only some children in their community have access to high quality schools. Now, non-charter parents were more likely to say that only some children have this access, while on the other hand, charter parents were more likely to say that all or most children have access compared to non-charter parents. But as we can see in this graph here, a majority of both parent groups think that only some children have access to high quality schools in their community. Now, the main difference from 2019 is that there's slightly less non-charter parents say that no children have access to high quality schools in their community. This year, it was about 3.3% of non-charter parents said no children. Last year, that was 7.4%. And so we do see some improvement there. Otherwise, these results are very similar to last year. Now, I don't think that the findings to this question say a lot about the charter schools specifically. I think this is more of a statement about the state of education overall. And so I think this does suggest that inequity remains a concern for parents in charter school communities. And again, I think that says more about public education overall than just the charter sector per se. And we actually asked, this is a new question that we asked this year that we did not have in the previous year. And we asked specifically, how has opening a charter school affected access to high quality schools in your community? And we asked this one to kind of better understand why parents were responding to the previous questions in the way that they did. So just over half believe that opening a charter school has affected access to high quality schools very or somewhat positively. And again, we see this opinion much more among charter parents than non-charter parents. And we do see about 1 in 10 non-charter parents actually believe the effect to be somewhat or very negative. So among charter parents, about 85% think that the effect is either very or somewhat positive. And that's compared to just over half, about 54% of non-charter parents. And another interesting finding here is that charter parents are much less indecisive about their answer to this question. You'll notice that in the middle, for neither positive nor negative, only 13% of charter parents said neither positive or negative. But among non-charter parents, over a third, and actually that was the biggest share of these answers among non-charter parents, said that it was neither positive nor negative, which to me kind of shows that maybe those parents aren't really sure or not very decisive on their answer to this question. Now, this question is very similar to when we asked about the effect of charter schools on education generally, as opposed to specifically access to high quality schools. But there was a little bit of a difference between answers to these two questions. So here we have about 61% of charter parents say that the effect has been very positive when we ask about high quality schools. But when we ask about the effect on education in general, we have 75% of charter parents say that it's been very positive. So charter parents are more likely to say that the effect on education generally is very positive compared to the effect on access to high quality schools. So parents are conceptualizing education and access to high quality schools a little bit differently. I think that the difference in answers is probably because the concept of education, if it's improving or not, is a little bit less tangible than the concept of high quality schools. But we do see a little bit of a difference there. So the next questions we asked specifically of charter parents, of the 214 charter parents in our sample. And these questions specifically have to do with satisfaction with charter schools. And so this really tells us a lot about what the experience is of students and parents at Mississippi charter schools. Now, because there's such a small sample size for each individual charter school, we can't really assess whether the results kind of differ by each charter school. We can't say whether, parents at one school have a better opinion than at the other school because there's just so few overall. But we can generalize these findings to Mississippi charter parents as a whole. So, like I said, can't do it by school, but overall, we can say these are reflective of charter parents overall. So the first questions had to do with school environment. And here, charter parents are, similar to last year, very, very satisfied with their child's school environment. And we have over 90% approval on all but one of the indicators. So there were 9 statements about the school environment, and these were the percentage of charter parents that either agreed or strongly agreed. So as you can see here, over 95% of charter parents agreed or strongly agreed with 6 out of 9 of the statements. These were statements like, the school has high standards for my students' academic achievement, the school is safe, or overall, the school is a good place to learn. We had 93% of parents agree with 2 statements, and that was the school is a caring and nurturing place, and that I, as the parent, have opportunities for involvement at the school. Now you'll notice that the school office is going to be the lowest indicator here. But I should note that at 88%, it's still pretty high satisfaction. And last year, there was about 7.2% of parents disagreed that the school office was being well run, which compared to other responses was pretty high. But this year, parents were actually, almost no charter parents disagreed with this statement. So that percentage of those who disagreed went from 7.2% to less than 1%. So that was a very, very clear improvement in how school offices are run in terms of how parents think about them. And because that was an issue last year, we actually asked follow-up questions this year about the school office to kind of see why people were dissatisfied. But because so few charter parents disagreed that with the school office being well run, it essentially meant that the follow-up questions were irrelevant because we only asked the follow-up questions of those who disagreed that the office was being well run. But like I said, very, very clear improvement on the school office this year. The next statements that we asked had to do specifically with educational program quality. And these indicators received, even higher marks than last year, which in my opinion were very impressive even then. And the only area of concern, we saw notable improvement again. So here's the breakdown of those. And you'll see out of 9 of the statements here, we had at least 90% of parents agreeing with 8 out of 9 of them. And these were statements like, the school does a good job preparing my student for college, a good job of teaching my student basic skills like reading and life skills like responsibility. And overall, I am satisfied with my students' academic progress. So very, very positive findings there. Now, similar to with the school office, student discipline was one area of relative concern last year. We had only about 80% of parents agree or strongly agree that student discipline was going well. And this year, you'll notice that about 90% of parents agree with student discipline being fair. And so again, that's almost 10 percentage points of improvement, which really, really shows strong improvement on the part of charter schools. And again, we also asked follow-up questions about student discipline this year, but because so few people disagreed with student discipline being fair, the follow-up questions were essentially irrelevant. Now, the last thing I'll note is that the lowest indicator this year was the statement of the school provides individualized instruction for my student. With 87.6%, this was the lowest indicator, but it's still pretty strong approval in my opinion. But individualized instruction might be something that schools want to consider or put a little more emphasis on going forward. But overall, very, very strong approval across the board. Now, the final questions that we asked and that I'm going to talk about today just have to do with overall satisfaction with charter schools. Satisfaction is even higher this year than last year, which we have almost every parent saying that they would recommend their child's school to others. So this is a breakdown of what grade parents would give their child's charter school. And I think, in my opinion, one of the most positive findings of this entire survey that we've done this year is the percentage of parents that now give their child's school an A. So last year it was just over half, about 53%, which still is pretty good. But this year it went up more than 11 percentage points to 64.3% that would give their child's school an A. So again, we see really, really clear improvement on behalf of charter schools and how parents perceive the quality of education going on there. Across the board, just a lot of really good improvement. And as I also mentioned earlier, similar to last year, we had almost all parents, 98% of charter parents, would recommend their child's school to other families. And we had about 86.5% of charter parents said that they planned to re-enroll their child in the current charter school in the following school year. And of the parents who said that they were not re-enrolling their child, the majority of them are either moving away, or their child is aging out of the grades that are offered by the school. And so we have barely any charter parents are choosing to leave their charter school specifically because of dissatisfaction with the school. Almost no parents are leaving because of that reason. So overall, looking at the entire survey from this year, I think it reflects just very well on Mississippi charter schools. I think that it really speaks to the hard work and dedication on behalf of everybody involved. There is some work to be done in terms of educating the public about charter schools and really promoting charter schools as a complementary option to traditional public schools. But I think one of the best arguments that we can make is that parents at charter schools are satisfied. And I think that this survey lends overwhelming evidence to that end. So that pretty much wraps up my presentation today. Again, thank you to the board. Thank you to Dr. Karmacharya for having me. And I'm happy to take some follow-up questions if we have time.
Does anybody
If there is follow-up questions.
Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask Torin? Go. We got to get you unmuted, Jennifer. Let's see.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Torin, I have an observation. I was happy to hear you mention Clarksdale Collegiate and the fact that the parents understand their role as a public school. I was invited to be a part of the virtual groundbreaking for Clarksdale Collegiate, and it was very impressive. The impressive thing was the parent involvement, the student involvement, and the enthusiasm. And it was such a great way to promote their school. I shared it. I'm sure the other parents shared it. And since then, I've been included in invitations to meet their students of the month and that kind of thing. I would love to see an increase in the social media footprint of some other charter schools that I think would really educate both the charter and the non-charter parents in understanding exactly what's going on with their school and their children. But kudos to Clarksdale Collegiate. Very well done.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Whittier, for those comments.
I have two questions.
Yes, Ms. Willis?
In terms of, this is all really great information and it shows a positive trend for our charter school. Certainly there are areas that we have to work on, including educating parents and the general public on the fact that a charter school is a public school. The question that I have though is, in terms of the environment, the school climate, are you able to gather information on other school climate surveys to compare with how charter school and non-charter school parents show up very, very differently? And I say that from another lens or background, and that we have been, and some of the other work that I've dealt with, been able to collect school climate information. And there is a stark difference between how charter school, non-charter school parents view the school environment, the teacher involvement, their involvement. And just wondering if you've been able to find any of that information, and if it might be helpful to, especially if we plan to use this information in any way to show what the stark realities are.
Yeah, so is your question that, have we compared some of the school environment and program quality indicators of charter schools, compared those indicators with non-charter schools, traditional public schools?
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's my question.
No, so we haven't made a direct comparison. It would definitely be something for, perhaps next year's survey to look into if there are similar questions asked of traditional public schools and some indicators there. We'd have to be kind of careful about comparing answers to questions unless they were worded very similarly, or if they were asked in a similar context in a survey like this. But I do agree that I think that would tell us a lot about kind of the differences in experiences, and could really speak to some of the impact that charter schools are having with their school environment and with the educational program quality.
Lauren, I want to add also that the Education Next poll that we pulled some of the data from to compare our survey results to national results had some questions in a previous iteration that were similar to some of the satisfaction questions that we used this year. And those satisfaction questions showed that our results in Mississippi were far stronger than how parents felt nationally about different types of schools in general. And that was actually in last year's report that I'm sure Dr. Karmatura can share with you the results of last year's report so that you can see a little bit of analysis on that point. But Torin's right, the questions have to be very, very similar for us to be able to do cross-school comparisons. And we were able to do that because some of the Education Next questions were nearly identical to our questions. But we only polled, within the scope of this project, we were only polling satisfaction for charter schools. But that's a conversation for the board to have in the future about whether or not they would want to expand the scope of this poll to also ask those non-charter parents similar questions about their child's non-charter school, so that we could have some of that comparison data.
And so to that, into my other question, is how do we intend to use this information from authorizing board perspective?
Is that question for me then?
Yes, yes.
One of the things that we will do automatically is we're going to start promoting much more widely the work that we do, and in response to the communication, ensuring that we are, everywhere we go, we're telling our story. We tried to do that last year. We were going to do a cross-state tour and really get that message out there, and then COVID hit. And so it is on our agenda to have that same activity going forward in the spring if all things settle down and we can get out there and really share. We do have a social media presence. I'm on Twitter. We have of course, our website, which is full of information, and all of this information will be out there. But this work in particular has an op-ed that will go with it that the team at Mississippi First did, that we'll be pushing out as well. We'll do the press release. I'm trying to think about, we have some push cards. We have lots of different materials that we'll use in conjunction with our annual report to do some marketing across different areas, as well as promoting the work of our schools and celebrating their successes so that folks can really know what we're doing and what we're about, who we are, and how we can continue to improve public education across the state.
And I should also mention that we're doing an additional presentation specifically with charter school leaders later today to talk with them specifically about at the school level kind of what they can do with findings at that point.
Right. Other questions about what? Yeah, Jean?
Yeah, I have a question about awareness about whether charter schools are public or private. Is the point of that is the point of that question about funding or about operations? So, because I'm wondering if people, when they hear public-private, they're thinking about it's not a traditional public school like my local public school, some organization runs it, and therefore I think it's private, not that it's a tuition-based school. So I'm just wondering what the intention of that question is.
So the intention of the question overall is to just see how parents conceptualize of charter schools to begin with. In asking the question, we had the people giving the survey to give a brief description of what charter schools were before they asked that question. I don't have the exact wording in front of me, but I think it was they mentioned both the fact that they are publicly funded, but also that the way they're run is a little bit different too. So we do mention that in kind of the lead up to the question. But overall, it's just to see if parents conceptualize of charter schools, how they conceptualize them.
Thank you.
And Jean, it's also to in general to see if the public understands what a charter school is. One of the most common misconceptions about charter schools nationally is that parents don't always know what they are. They don't know if they're magnet schools, they don't know if they're public schools, they don't know if they're private schools. And it's not really about tuition or not tuition, it's just they don't know how to classify them in their minds. And so that question is to try to see how well we, as a charter sector, have educated the public on this very important point that they are public schools.
And I will say, Jean, too, if you remember from the annual report, we specifically put a page in there this year about the myth and recognizing the facts that, the facts are this, that we are a public school. The facts are this, we don't charge tuition. These are the facts, so that we can really help wherever we go, get that information out, that we are public schools and we are held accountable, and our schools are held accountable, our children, everybody that's a part of the work. So. Rachel, do you have anything else you want to share?
I feel like I ought to already know the answer to this, but do we have much of a budget for marketing, getting our annual report out to people? Social media, I'm thinking social media specifically. Do we have any budget at all to enhance our social media presence?
We do have some money set aside for communication that we set aside each year. And then we have some money set aside in the CSP grant for some marketing as well. It's not called marketing. I'd have to go back to the language of the grant, but there is some opportunity to use those funds in part of this conversation in public awareness. So in fact, the grant, this survey itself was paid through the grant. So it was through and a part of the grant. So sharing those results will be important. Sharing all these results, actually.
I think what Ms. Willis brought up is very, very crucial. It's one thing to know these things. It's another thing to be able to use them to our advantage. So I hope we can keep on doing that. Are there any other questions of Torin? Thank you, Torin. That was a really good report.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just want to say thanks again to Mississippi First. You guys did a great job. Mackenzie's not on the call. I don't see her, but I know she did a lot of the graphics and put together the social media pieces for us, and she did a great job. So thank you guys, the whole team, for all your work on this. We appreciate the partnership.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Our pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, if there are no more questions or comments about the report, let's move on to the committee reports. Dr. K?
Yeah, so another exciting piece of the reports for this month is our report from SchoolWorks, and Sarah Rapay is on the call today from SchoolWorks. She's waving at everybody there in one of your little boxes, the Brady Bunch boxes, and she is going to share on behalf of the committee who met last week what the results and the findings were from stage 3.
Great, thank you, Dr. K. Hi, everyone. Again, it's nice to see your faces. I'm Sarah Rapay. I'm with SchoolWorks. SchoolWorks is an educational consulting company out of Western Massachusetts. Our mission is to advance all aspects of student learning and well-being by building the capacity of educators and educational institutes. And so you all hired us to conduct your external evaluations for the charter applications that were submitted this year. And just as a little reminder, your mission is to authorize high quality charter schools, particularly schools designed to expand opportunities for underserved students consistent with the purposes of your chapter. So you worked with us, you hired us so that you would have an outside evaluator that can determine the quality of the applications, and you all can stay free from bias as you move into your role of authorizer and ensuring accountability for the students in the school that they're serving. So SchoolWorks has been in operation for about 25 years, and we've been conducting reviews like this all across the country, and happy to be doing work in Mississippi this year. This process, as I think you know, is divided into 3 phases. The first phase is a completeness check. The second phase is really designed to identify applicant groups that are perhaps not going to meet the bar that you all set. And then the third phase includes a full review of the application, and it also includes a capacity interview, which is quite telling, as well as a 3-page response, which allows the applicant group to respond to the initial evaluation and provide additional clarity where necessary. So with that being said, let me just explain a little bit about the roles. We had a project manager, that's me. We also had a generalist reviewer. The reviewers that we have been doing this work for a number of years all across the country and have a good lens into high quality applications and what they really ought to look like and how to apply a rubric to an application. We also had a financial reviewer who read the application but specifically commented on the sections that were finance, facilities, and operations. We also, part of our process is that we have a quality editor who reads the reviews as an outside perspective to identify questions, probe, ask for more clarity, and really push the reviewers to maintain that high bar that I know you all want. So with that being said, I'd like to share the recommendations. I'll stop there though and see if you all have any questions about the process that we applied for this round. Well, I will share my screen. This is the, can everybody see the evaluation report? Okay, great. So this is for SR1, College Preparatory and STEM Academy new charter school application, today's date. So this is the final recommendation, and the evaluation team is recommending approval. One thing to note about this applicant is that they are seeking to open in 2022. That's pretty important. And following stage, just if I can backwards map a little bit, following stage 3, the applicant had 12 of 24 areas that did not meet the standard. You can see in this section here, these are the areas. They met the standard in all of them. But following the stage 3, which was the review of the application, they met 12 of 24 areas. Following the capacity interview, where we had a 1.5-hour interview with the applicant group and were able to probe and ask for clarity, they only had 4 partially meet standards, all of which were satisfied in the 3-page response. So this applicant group was able to explain more and give more clarity and breadth and depth to their responses through the capacity interview as well as the 3-page response. SR1 is a college prep school in STEM, and it wants to begin as a K1 and then expand a grade each year until it serves students in K5. A couple things to note: they do not have a facility yet, but they are working with an architect and have a tentative plan for facility acquisition. They noted and explained that that plan will begin in November of this year, and they're working with creditors that they've worked with previously, as well as the realtor and some architects and developers. Additionally, SR1 is an existing organization that serves schools after school. They are transitioning some of their key members to the leadership role at the school. They will be no longer associated with SR1. They're just going to be working solely for the school. And they did provide a contract pending approval with Board on Track that will help the board transition over, and they're working with an attorney to ensure legal compliance. So those were a couple areas of concern from the review team that were able to be satisfied in their responses through the capacity interview as well as the 3-page response. I'll just kind of show you real briefly. This is a pretty robust review. There's a lot of feedback. Each individual standard under all of the areas is getting an evaluative comment or 4. It just depends on how much writing, but pretty robust feedback and a high level of scrutiny to the standard or the criteria to make sure that they meet that. So that is for SR1. Does anyone have any, I can't see everybody's faces now because of the way I'm presenting, but does anyone have any questions about that applicant group? Trying my best to do wait time, sometimes hard for me. All right, I'm going to switch over then to Voices for Education. I'm not sure if you're I'm still trying to figure out Zoom some days. Let me just go back into here a minute. Okay, can everybody see that it says Mound Bayou New Millennial High School? Okay, so we're recommending denial of this application. I'll just give some highlights. This applicant is proposing to open in 2021 with grades 7 through 10 and expanding to 7 through 12. They proposed a blended learning and STEM curriculum, but they did not sufficiently link their educational program to the research that indicates that the students that they would serve, that this would be an appropriate program for them. Some highlights, following stage 3 review, which is the review of the application, they had 21 of 25 areas that did not meet the standard. So four areas that did. Following the capacity interview, they had 17 of 25 areas that did not meet the standard, so they moved up a few. And then following the 3-page response, they still had 16 of 25 areas that did not meet the standards, with only 9 areas fully meeting the standard. Additionally, they do not have a facility secured, and which is not required at this stage, but there was an insufficient plan really indicating how they would do that. And this application relied, or the board relied heavily on hiring a headmaster who would have significant level of responsibility and duties, and would help flesh out the academic program that we typically would see within the body of an application. So that application, we are recommending that you deny. So that's all I have to share about the applications. Go ahead, Lisa.
I just might say that this, you'll see under new business is when action will be taken on these 2 items here. So this is just for your information as we go forward into the meeting. So thank you, Sarah, for your presentation.
Yeah.
And for your work.
Yes, our pleasure.
All right, Mr. Billingsley. Oh, can't hear him.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can.
Okay, my stupid dog started barking. Okay, I had initially asked if anyone had any more questions for Sarah. I'm assuming they don't. And let's go ahead and move into the public comment area of the meeting. If there are people who would like to make a public comment, you're welcome to do so. Please try to keep your remarks under 5 minutes. Is there anyone on the call that would like to make a public comment?
Mr. Billingsley, we do have the process for public comment, and we did receive one prior to the meeting, and so I'm not seeing that person. I saw that person earlier. It was Ms. Hutton from SR1, and if you're still here, Ms. Hutton, you have an opportunity to give public comment.
Yes, hello, I'm still here. We're just on a group.
Oh, I see you guys now.
We're in together. I just would like to say thank you to the authorizer board and also the staff, and also the time and effort put in by the review team for this year's Call for Quality Schools. As an organization, also as the proposed school, SR1 College Preparatory and STEM Academy, we are elated and excited to provide quality schools for students in Mississippi. We will dedicate our time and our services to ensuring that students receive high quality education that will prepare them not only for college, but also for career. And we just look forward to working with you all upon approval. And thank you so much for a process that was very accurate, on time, and easy to follow.
Great comments.
Okay, I'm sorry, Dr. Carmichael. I knew that they had to be approved ahead of time. I just wasn't thinking. I appreciate you correcting me on that. Since there are no other people who have applied for a public comment, we'll move on to new business. Dr. K?
Yeah, our first item of new business then is A under new business. It's the 2020 Call for Quality Schools, Stage 3 final findings. You all heard from SchoolWorks. Sarah Rapay gave that report on behalf of the review committee and the review team. And so you have an opportunity now to consider both of those schools in your decision-making process for going forward.
All right. I'd like to make a motion. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mr. Speed,
Yes,
thank
go ahead.
you.
I'd like to make a motion that,
Yes, sir.
that the board approve the application for a school charter from SR1 in Canton, Mississippi. I would also like to make a motion that the application from Mountain Bayou Millennium High School be denied at this time.
Do those,
Those up individually, please, for the minutes and.
yeah. Let's take the first question first. The first motion is for approval of the SR1 school. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. The charter, SR1 is approved. The second motion was for denial of the school in Mountain Bayou. Jordan, do you have all of the proper wording for that? I know that wasn't exactly what Mr. Speed said, but
Yes, sir. I think
is there a
I need for the minutes.
Is there a second on that motion?
Second.
Thank you,
Thank
Ms.
you. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With no opposed, the motion passes and that school application is denied. Dr. Carmen Shire, you want to move to the next?
Yes, sir. Would you like me to?
Does that finish everything under new business?
And it finishes item A under new business.
Okay.
So we can move to B with the board's approval. We can move to B and I would like the board to consider accepting the public perception report of charter schools in Mississippi so that we can release that publicly with your.
Can I have a motion for the acceptance of that report? Thank you. And a second, please.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 The report, with there being no opposition, the report is approved for public release.
Thank you.
Next.
Okay, under C with new business, you have in your packet an amended work plan from Professional Polish, and I believe Ms. Perry is still on the call here. You know her from the last time we met, where she provided an update on the work that she's been doing with our schools, in particular our applicants and our new schools that were in pre-opening this year, or our LaFleur Legacy that was in pre-opening. She's been doing considerable work with them. However, having said that, COVID has certainly put a little bit of a pause on some of the work and the timelines and the challenges. So we have worked with Mary to ensure that her scope of work meets CDC guidelines and that she can get to where she needs to go. She can support our schools and move forward with the work that's in and around and under the CSP grant. So in your application or in your packet, you have that amended work plan for consideration by the board.
Are there any questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the amended work plan?
So moved.
Thank you. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? There being no opposition, we will approve the amended work plan is approved. Dr. K, the next item.
Yes, the final item under new business would be to consider the approval of a release of an RFP to revise the performance framework. And as you all know, nearly since day one, we've been working very diligently to ensure that all of our products, all of our resources, all of our processes align. And that means they align to the statute, they align to the contract, they align to the framework. Everything is aligned and it makes sense as we work together to support our schools, hold our schools accountable, and hold ourselves accountable as a board. And so having said that, the framework was really in need of some overhaul to define and clarify some of the contents and the indicators that were in there. And so that we can be fair with our schools and hold them accountable and hold them to a high standard, we want to ensure that that document is up to date and meets the best practices that are founded under what NACSA does, as well as other quality authorizers do. So we'd like to put that out for consideration and release that as soon as possible to be due back in November 30th, on November 30th.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I will entertain a motion to approve the release of that RFP.
So moved.
Thank you. A second. Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Jordan, did you get the second on that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The motion is approved. We will go ahead and release the RFP for the amended or revised performance framework and expect to see something on it after November 30th. The next item on the agenda is executive session. Unless I need to be corrected, I don't think there's a reason to go into executive session today. So I think let's move on to the setting of the next meeting. Dr. Carmen Shire, would you like to describe what you'd like to do with the December meeting?
Yes, sir. I think it was last month, but y'all forgive me. My months are running together. I think COVID, I have the COVID whatever that's going through, running all my months together. But I believe it was last month we met and approved, or you all approved a work session, and it was decided to go with an early morning, 8:30 to 12 work session, all one day, followed by the board meeting. The board meeting date was on that 14th. So what this would do would just bring you guys in a few hours early to work through some strategic planning and have a couple of visitors to that work session.
Okay, everybody is suitably reminded. I needed it too. I would like to also add that things like this are especially more productive and helpful for us to be there in person if it's at all possible. I know that I've been to the office since the COVID pandemic, and I know that we have the ability to follow all the guidelines. We can keep everyone separated the way we need to. There are plenty of masks. We can make it safe for you to attend the meeting. So I would encourage everyone to make every effort they can to attend this meeting in person. Okay, any other items that need to come before the board? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move.
Thank you. And a second, please.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. We are adjourned. See you all in December.
Thank you all so much.
Bye.